Hey guys, welcome to my kitchen here at Roots Refuge Farm. My name is Jessica Sowards. If you are new here, I'm so glad that you're here. If you're not new here, I am also glad that you're here and welcome back. Today, I am starting a video series, one that I've talked about lots of these things smattered through 1,000 vlogs over the years. Some of this may be new information, but a lot of it is probably going to be repeat, but all in one place. And this is something that gets requested a lot as of the time of recording this video. It is winter of 2022, getting ready to go into 2023. You can't go in the grocery store without hearing people talk about the prices and go on social media without people talking about how much the sticker shock is rising. And a lot of people are very concerned, and I see that. And I see a lot of people talking about preparation and survival skills and all of these different things. And I think those are good conversations to have. I think wisdom is prepared for whatever life may throw at it. And being prepared is wise. But there's one thing we should talk about more, and that is kitchen skills and learning to cook from scratch. In fact, in the world of homesteading, in gardening, in preparation, whatever niche you may find yourself most comfortable in, I think it all comes back to the kitchen, because whenever you decide to grow your own food, you grow ingredients, and therefore if you have no kitchen skills, you're going to find yourself extremely limited with what you can do with what you put your hard work into growing. So I'm starting this series today kind of sharing some really basic stuff as far as the homestead kitchen, how to stock it, what to do in it, some basic skills that you can learn. And the thing that I love about this is that if you are in that place of waiting for fulfillment, perhaps you're not in a place of moving into the country yet. Perhaps you don't want to. Maybe you just want to localize your food and maybe make some more sustainable choices, and you have no intention of growing it past where you are, and that's okay. No matter where you are, I love to say the phrase, turn your waiting room into a classroom, because we don't have to just sit on our hands whenever we're not able to do everything we imagine doing. In fact, we're so much better off if, when we have a big dream of doing something later on, if we equip ourselves in the meantime. And for me, my homesteading journey started in the kitchen. I became this thing that just welled up in me that I absolutely needed to grow food. I wanted it so bad, and that's just a whole story that I've told before, and I'm sure I'll tell again. And the thing that I found myself asking is, well, I don't have land. I don't have much help. I had very small children. I was very limited in a lot of ways in what I was able to do, but what I could do was cook. I had a kitchen. I did not have a very well-stocked kitchen at that time. I did not have very much money to be able to stock that kitchen. I had a very limited budget. Even going to the farmer's market, I was wanting to localize food, but I would go and I only had $20 to spend, and that didn't buy very much. Actually, the thing that was kind of like the big open doorway for me was that I had a friend that offered for me to come forage wild blackberries on her father-in-law's land. We would go, and I would so tenaciously pick gallons of blackberries because it was an ingredient that I could go home and I could take to my kitchen, and I could learn to do things. And that's actually where I learned to make jam. It's where I learned to make cobblers. It's where I learned to can, where I learned to, properly freeze things. And I learned so much with those free foraged blackberries, and I felt more like a homesteader. It felt like a more palpable dream than ever before. And I want you guys to be able to feel that. So I have a tendency to kind of complicate things and have an idea of how I want to do something, and I've wanted to do this series for a very long time. But the truth is that my kitchen is just a real kitchen. I'm a real mom. This is a real farm, and I am doing content kind of on the side of the real reality of my life. This is not a set. And I finally decided, you know what, we're gonna do a real series in a real kitchen. And I think that actually may help you more, because I assume that you're not cooking on a set either. So this might actually work better for you. Today, the thing that I'm going to cover in the first part of this series is I did not have the stocked kitchen 15 years ago when I started that I have now, by any means. Most of my initial appliances and things that I had, I got at garage sales, at thrift stores, off Craigslist. This was before Facebook Marketplace, but later on I would find things on Facebook Marketplace. I bought used things. I try to buy the highest quality that I could afford right off the front end. I preferred to buy things used that were higher quality rather than going and buying something brand new that was of a lower quality, because a lot of time the price point was the same. And I built the stocked kitchen off of birthday presents and Christmas presents. People would say, don't give your wife an appliance for Christmas. And I'd be like, no, please give your wife an appliance for Christmas, because I wanted these things because this was my hobby. Cooking and food sustainability and security were 100% what I wanted to do. So I wanted to be equipped for that. Now, husbands, you know your audience. I'm not necessarily saying give all the appliances for Christmas. I don't know the situation, but for the guys and gals out there that are anything like me, this is what they actually want. I actually wanted this stuff. And so I'm purposely making this video first right here as we're in the thick of the holiday season, because it might help those of you who have a spending budget decide what might be a good way to spend that money. I do now have a very well-stocked kitchen, very well equipped. This represents years of piecing this together. And because of that, I can give you some insight to different tools that might help you. But I want to tell you, be tenacious. Like, if I'm like, hey, here's the dehydrator I use, which is a very nice dehydrator. The first dehydrator I had was $17 on an end cap at a grocery store. It dehydrated things somewhat unevenly, but it's what I used for years, and it worked well enough. And prior to that, when I didn't have a dehydrator, I dehydrated things in my oven on very low temperature with the oven cracked. Where there is a will, there is a way. And though now I might say, hey, here are some bread mixers, here are some different things that will help with these things, I made a lot of those things by hand, and I gained muscle because I did not have a mixer, and so I needed things for 7 minutes. Please do not allow your lack of finances or lack of equipment to tell you that you're out of the game. You're not out of the game. And I genuinely believe with my whole heart that when you are tenacious and you steward what you have, the little thing that you have, you end up finding these things it works out. I don't know how to describe it other than you steward the small things and you get the larger things. And I can't tell you how often it happened for me. And I'm telling you this because I want you to be encouraged. That when I had no money to buy the big expensive thing, I found some way to get the job done without it. And I would do that, and I would do that with joy that I was getting to do what I was doing. And I would walk into a thrift store and find a $300 appliance for 20 bucks. And I cannot even tell you how many times things like that happened for me. And then of course, over the years, I have upgraded things. And now I do have, admittedly, an incredibly well-stocked kitchen. But it wasn't always like this. And I don't want you to start seeing these things and be like, I'll never have all this. These are just suggestions. These are skills that these tools help make them easier. But write the skill down first and decide that's what you're going to do. And if you've got the means to go ahead and get the great tool, awesome. It's nice to be able to do that. But if you don't, find the best that you can get and find a way to get things done, and just commit yourself to the process, because I am a living testament that actually works out well. So today we're just gonna go through my real farmhouse kitchen and talk about some of my most used items and the jobs that we get done with them. Now we have home dairy that's coming from our farm. We raise meat on our farm, and we also grow very large gardens. Much of this food we use fresh. We cook a lot from scratch, and then we also do a lot of preservation. And so all of the tools that I'm talking about are really imperative for all of those things. All right, first and foremost, I'm over here at my shelf that has the stock pots. I'm going to tell you about a couple of different kinds of pots that I very regularly use. So I do want to be very frank. I mostly do not use any non-stick cookware. I do own a couple of Pampered Chef non-stick cookware. Is it completely non-toxic? Probably not. but I have children that I'm teaching to cook, and those pans are most frequently used with things that aren't going to scratch them by like teenagers who are cooking delicate things like eggs. So most of my cooking is not done in nonstick. If you've never done any research about nonstick cookware, it can be extremely detrimental to your health. And so years ago, I moved away from that. So for stock pots, I typically use stainless steel. And I have a large collection of odds and ends stock pots. These were both from like TJ Maxx or something like that. They have a really good selection of big stock pots like that. I like stock pots that have a nice heavy bottom, a stainless steel pot. I use these for cheese making and anything that you have to boil, doing like a quick stock with a chicken. I also have here some enameled stainless stock pots. These are both Le Creuset that I've bought from outlets. I think I paid like $25 for this one, which is like a dang good deal for that. But stock pots of all sizes. Typically you want it to be a heavy bottom because that's just going to conduct heat a lot more evenly. I also have a like 20 quart stainless stock pot, and then we have an even bigger one than that we will do for like a crawfish boil. It's what we use to scald birds sometimes whenever we're butchering. Stock pots of all sizes. And if you can find those cheap or used, I would say if you've got a place to store it, you're never gonna be like, wow, I wish I didn't have this massive stock pot whenever you have a Homestead kitchen. And if you have a really massive stock pot, you can also use that doubled as a water bath canner. I'll show you canners here in just a little bit. Now, I also have enameled cast iron Dutch ovens. And that's what, this is a 14 quart. These are 7 quarts. As you can see, they've seen better days. This is a really cute one that's shaped like a tomato that a viewer sent me very kindly. I love this. But yeah, you can see I have multiple here. That's a 5.5 quart. And down here, I also have some enameled cast iron saucepans, as well as enameled cast iron casserole dishes. This is Staub is the brand. This is Le Creuset, which some people are probably looking at that very expensive pot and how stained it is and being like, shame on you, but again, real kitchen. This is called Tramontina. This is a brand that they sell at Sam's Club, and this pot runs about $40, whereas this one runs about $300. And I would say the Le Creuset, the enamel, has held up better over time than my cheaper pots. However, they really work about the same. And I have had that Tramontina pot for about 10 years. I've had others that chipped up real bad and I had to get rid of, but that one's held up. And I know Lodge makes them. I know there are other brands that make them. I've seen them at Walmart. I've seen them all over. I will tell you that my Staub one is my favorite, and it's because the inside is not enameled. So the inside of this pot is just cast iron and the outside is enameled. This is also really huge. It would be unnecessary if you weren't regularly feeding a lot of people. But because we have a big family, a lot of times I end up having to use 2 of the 7 quarts to make stew or soup when we have guests over, whereas I can just use this 114 for that. But I think you can't go wrong with an enameled cast iron Dutch oven. We use these for braising meat. So you can put like a leg of lamb, you can put a whole chicken, season it, you can put it in the oven, cover it, and turn the oven down really low and slow cook it with some sort of like broth or something in there and have really tender fall apart meat. I like it because you can brown, let's say stew meat in this. You brown it, you put the other ingredients in, put the broth in, and just let it simmer all afternoon. And you've got one pot for all of those things. You can also bake bread in enameled cast iron. We do that. That's what I bake my sourdough in typically, is in enameled cast iron. It doesn't have to be enameled too. I'm saying that because that's what mine is. I think it's pretty, but you can get big just plain cast iron pans, and that's also just fine. The beauty of cast iron pots, which I don't always use these interchangeably. Cast iron pots are gonna hold a lot of heat. So if you're just trying to like boil water real quick, like I typically am gonna grab a stainless steel pan for that. Whereas with the cast iron, you could boil water. You could make, you know, boil potatoes or whatever it is you want to do. I make broths in them. I do all of that stuff. But they're a little slower to warm, and then they hold heat for a long time, which is kind of nice if you're cooking dinner at 5, you don't want to serve it till 6, because you can just kind of put the lid on and it holds a lot of moisture in, and it's going to keep it warmer than a less conductive pot is going to do. I like having both, and I use both equally. All right, now let's talk about cast iron. Now, if you've been with me long, you know that I love cast iron with a passion. We store ours on a pegboard. We had a pegboard like this in our old house. It's nice because you don't ever want to put cast iron away wet, because it will cause it to rust. And by hanging it this way, if you have teenagers doing your dishes that don't necessarily dry things as well as you would, it's going to go ahead and dry and they're not going to rust. So I like hanging mine. You do want to make sure this is secure because this is a lot of weight. It also helps for me to make this more usable because these pans are very heavy, and storing them down under the cabinets when they're all stacked up, it's just harder to get them in and out. This is just way easier. Cast iron can easily become very addictive and kind of a hobby. Many people who have an eye for it will keep their eye out at estate sales and garage sales and antique shops and find really old cast iron and bring it back to life. There are stories of people's houses who have burned down, and what survived was the cast iron. These can very much become heirloom pieces. Now, the beauty of cast iron is that good cast iron doesn't have to cost a lot. Now, I have a couple of pans. I've had people comment on them before. Maya gave them to me as a Christmas gift a couple years ago, and they're beautiful. They're hand forged in South Carolina, and he gave these to me right after we had decided to move here, so it's kind of like a symbolic thing. The brand is called Smithy, but while I love that they are hand forged in South Carolina, and that's really cool, I can't say that they function any differently than like my Lodge cast iron that I've had forever. So I'm going to show you a few size pans and kind of talk about what I do with them. Your need of different size pans, anything that I'm talking about, is very dependent on your family size. So this is an 8-inch cast iron pan. I got this at a garage sale for $1. I still remember because I was so jazzed. It was completely orange at the time, and I brought this one back by scrubbing it and baking it in the oven on low, covered in like shortening or lard or something, some sort of oil, for like a few hours, and resealing it. It's called seasoning. Basically, if you get an old cast iron pan, if you neglected your cast iron pan, it turned orange, it's not ruined. It takes a lot to ruin a cast iron pan. I've never managed to do it, and I've been cooking in it for 20 years. And so, like, it really takes a lot. I've seen people where their handles broke off. Technically, the pan's still usable, it just doesn't have a handle. So I guess you could say that, but it's hard to ruin them. Now, the way cast iron works is it gets what's called a seasoning, which you can kind of see. This one is pretty well seasoned. It gets real slick. Whenever you wash these, you just want to get them really hot. If it cooled off, just get it hot again with really hot water and scrub it. You don't have to use soap. It is a misconception that you cannot use soap on cast iron. You can use soap on cast iron, just re-oil it afterwards. You won't wreck your seasoning. Do not let your cast iron sit in soap. That will break down the seasoning. But you just get it really hot. You wipe it out. It's iron and it's sealed and seasoned, so it is like antimicrobial and all that stuff. It's not going to make anybody sick. You kind of like a well-seasoned pan. It makes it non-stick. And the way you get it well seasoned is just by using it, especially cooking fatty things. So if you get a new cast iron pan, cook some bacon in it, make some burgers in it, or something that's going to be fatty, and continue to do that. Wash it out with hot water, wipe it out, put a little bit more oil on it, hang it to dry or sit it on the stove and let it fully dry before you put it away, and then continually do that, and eventually you'll be able to do things like fry eggs in it and it won't stick. So this is the 8-inch. This is a small pan. In my house, we're not usually cooking this little of anything. So this is primarily an egg frying pan. In my house, it's pretty much the only thing we do with this. Here is a 10-inch pan. When I give a cast iron pan as a gift to anybody, this is usually the first one I give. My I have another 10-inch pan. I'm not sure exactly where it is. It's in the kitchen somewhere. That was the first cast iron pan I ever had. I bought it when I moved into my first apartment. So we've been together for a couple decades now, and this is a newer one that I've gotten. And as you can see, very well seasoned, very well loved pan. This is the one that if I'm going to sear maybe some steaks and stick them in the oven to cook, I'll use this. If I'm gonna caramelize onions, I use this pan for a lot of things. It's just super multi-purpose size. And then the next step up is the 12-inch, which is my most used size. You can see I've got two of them out here, two different brands, but as you can see, same size, about the same weight. They work the same. The 12-inch pan is a good size for making like dinner for a family. So if I'm gonna make fried potatoes for my family, I can make enough in a 12-inch pan that everybody's gonna get some on their plate. So I use this one a whole lot. You can also bake in these. Cornbread, this is our cornbread pan. We're usually making a 12-inch pan of cornbread whenever we're using that for dinner. Biscuits, you can roll out biscuits and lay them in here. Butter swim biscuits. Haven't been eating those lately because I've been eating a lot healthier, but that's a southern thing if you would like to eat something really tasty. Butter swim biscuits in a cast iron pan. All right, and now the last size I've had for quite a while. I actually have two of these also. This is a, I think it's called a 13-inch, but it's more like 14 inches, or maybe it's called a 14-inch and it's more 13 inches, I'm not sure. It's one or the other. This is a Lodge, and this is a massive pan. It's like manhole cover size, super huge. I'm gonna put it down because it's very heavy and I'll tell you about it. Now I bought my first 14-inch pan long time ago when I was first learning to cook from scratch. It's that one. I've had that one for probably about 15 years. And I bought it because I had learned a recipe where you cut the backbone out of a chicken and you spatchcock it, which is laying it flat, and you brown the chicken in oil. I've actually got a post, a blog post sharing that recipe. I'll put it down below. But that's the pan you do. Now you can fit a chicken in a 12-inch pan, but it fits a lot better in that one. And I bought that pan specifically for that recipe, but I use that a lot. So if you're cooking for a lot of people, having one big pan is really nice. Because it is cast iron, it does conduct heat really well. And so you can put it on the stove top. And even though the eye is significantly smaller than the pan, it does end up spreading out and the whole pan is usable. So I really like that. So that's a really good size. Of course, there's lots of other sizes of cast iron. Like this is a square grill pan. Here's like a little sauce melter, and here's a pie pan. I've got lots of different ones, and of course the enameled cast iron Dutch ovens. But if you have the 8, the 10, the 12, and the 14, you're gonna have pretty much whatever you need to get a job done. Now, because I do get asked a lot about this when people see me using my cast iron, I do have a flat top stove, and you will hear a lot of people tell you not to use cast iron on these. Some stoves are induction, so when you hear people say you can't can on that or you can't use cast iron, it has to do with the induction. Now this is not induction, this is just an electric flat top stove. So you would need to look at your individual model that you have and maybe look up and see if it works with those things, because there might actually be a function issue. As far as just a flat top stove, the reason they tell you not to use cast iron or can on this is because it can crack it. And I have talked to people firsthand who have had massive heavy pots on their stove and they cracked, or they dropped a heavy cast iron pan like that 14-inch thing. You could break a foot with that, much less a glass top stove. You could easily do that if you didn't have a good handle on it and you dropped it. We have been cooking on this flat top for 1.5 years now, almost, with cast iron the entire time, because we bought this mobile home and this is the stove that was in it. And it was like, well, we can replace it so that it doesn't break. And then we're definitely replacing it and paying to have it replaced. Or we can use it and replace it if it breaks. And that way, maybe we're not replacing it. So we just decided to kind of take that risk just because when we first moved in, we were, you know, like, we had a lot of expenses. We didn't want another one. And so far, so good. It's not broken yet. And I will tell you that it has had, It's had a couple pans drop a little bit, specifically by kids who were cooking. But, you know, I've scratched it some, being kind of careless, kind of moving things around. But for the most part, I'd say it's held up. And for the people who say you cannot, well, you can, but it is a risk. All right, the next thing, knives. Now I have an extremely fancy set of knives back here that was my Christmas gift last year. Those are Cutco. It was an investment. What I will tell you as far as having good knives is buy the best knife you can and learn how to sharpen it. You should have a whetstone, you should have some sort of sharpener, you should have a honing tool. Do not neglect your knives, do not put them in the dishwasher, and you can make even much less expensive knives work and last a long time if you maintain them well. Another thing that I think is just a really great thing to know if you're trying to equip a kitchen to actually really cook, you don't have to have a whole knife block. People think, oh, I need good knives, and so they start going and looking at knife sets. You don't have to have a set of expensive knives. Even this lovely set, which my sweet husband splurged on for me, there are knives in that set that I have used maybe once in the last year since I got them. So I'll tell you the sizes to look for. Getting a good chef's knife. So these are typically 8-inch knives, and learning how to use it well. This is a very important tool. I actually have two. This one was made for me by a precious friend. He's on Instagram. They're works of art. I love this knife. So these two, I mean, this is literally like my bread and butter as far as cutting stuff in the kitchen. I would even go as far to say as these two knives in my kitchen get more action than even the other ones that I'm saying are very good to have. These two probably get used more than the rest of them all combined. A good chef's knife is just irreplaceable. If you can only afford to buy one good knife, get an 8-inch chef's knife. Dull knives are very dangerous and they will make you hate cooking. So if you're processing potatoes and you are cutting potatoes like crazy, having a good sharp knife makes that job so much better. If you are breaking down whole chickens and cutting meat, having a good knife makes that job so much better. So many people will tell me, oh, I'm not good at doing that. And I'm like, your knife sucks. Like, what do you expect? It's not sharp. You know, I mean, like, it makes it so much harder. So learning to sharpen whatever knife you have is really important. So like a good medium all-purpose knife, sometimes like they're called Santoku knives. I think this is like a 6-inch or something like that. So this is really good. I actually typically reach for this one more. I like the leverage it gives me. And a paring knife. So just a little small one like this. Those three, I could do anything in my kitchen with those three knives. Those three are the ones that are usually dirty at the end of the day, need to be washed. I also have this kind of cleaver, and I have learned to love this. I did not have one prior to this year, but I use this a lot. All right, let's talk about mixing tools. This is a Breville food processor. I'll have to look up a link to tell you exactly which one this is. It's one of the nicer ones. This is a Bosch mixer. This is a stainless steel. They make it in plastic also. This is a 5-quart KitchenAid mixer. And I also have a Vitamix blender, which is the other part's dirty because I made a smoothie this morning. All right, this is one of those areas where my kitchen is like well stacked. But it took a long time. Some sort of mixer will make your life easier in the kitchen. It doesn't have to be top of the line, though many of the top of the line ones do come with lifetime warranties. And if you can get a much better warranty on a more expensive tool, you can actually save money in the long run by investing in that. I think I probably burned up about 4 $50 to $60 blenders before I finally bought a Vitamix. I've had that Vitamix for 17 years. This is my second KitchenAid. The first one lasted about 15 years, and it was actually user error. I did not maintain it well. I didn't for a long time know that you needed to take them apart and oil them, and it started making a really funny noise. I ended up burning the motor out, but it happened to be around like Black Friday time, and I ended up buying a new one because I found one for just a really, really good deal. So this is my second one of these, and I use it a lot. When I say that I have something for 15 years, I don't mean I have it and use it occasionally. I mean, like I ride these horses hard and put them up wet. Like, I am very rough on my stuff. I use it fully, almost to a point that you could even classify commercial use. I mean, sometimes I'm using these mixers for literally hours. They're really getting a lot of time put on them. So if I get 15 years out of something, I consider that a real win. I recently added this Bosch mixer to the lineup because I was making a lot of butter. And I was using my KitchenAid, but because it's all open, it splashes a lot of stuff out. So you have to be very attentive, and you have to process less at once. And on a kitchen day, when I'm through here trying to process a couple of gallons of cream and make pounds of butter, I'd also like to be able to, you know, maybe make bread. So having this tied up wasn't working for me, and I was looking for a butter churn, but they were back ordered everywhere. And I ended up deciding to buy a second mixer that has an enclosed top. So I primarily got this one to have a second mixer for when we're doing like bake-a-thons, but its main use has been to make butter. I will say between the two, for mixing doughs, I actually prefer the KitchenAid. Some people argue that. For me, I just like that better. I like how consistently it mixes smaller batches. I find that the Bosch actually seems to struggle when there's less ingredients. It does great with a heavy load, but with less ingredients, it takes a lot longer to mix things evenly. But for making butter, it's amazing. Now also, food processors. Now food processors are more for chopping and dicing, whereas you can like shred a chicken breast or chicken breasts in a KitchenAid, and there are attachments you can get that shred and dice. I've never used those. I've always just used a food processor. Prior to this one, which we got this one a few years ago, it was an investment. It's kind of one of the nicer ones. It chops potatoes and has all of fancy doodads. I mostly just use it with this blade. I mean, like, probably 70% of the time is me using this blade. 20% of the time is me using the cheese grater with it to shred cheese, because we don't really buy shredded cheese because it has preservatives. We usually do block cheese. And then maybe like 5% of the time I'm getting out those fancy gadgets. So mostly I'm just using it as a food processor. With food processors, I do find that the better brands like Cuisinart and Breville, they do typically hold up better. My first food processor was an ancient Cuisinart that I bought used, and I had it for years, and it did really well. It didn't do anything fancy. It just had the blade on the bottom. But I had paid like $10 for it at a garage sale. So that lasted a really long time. And then it finally died and wasn't able to be repaired because it was like 20 something years old. And I ended up buying like a Hamilton Beach or something that was cheaper. And I think I went through 2 or 3 of those where they would each last about a year before the motor died, and it was such a hassle to try to get them repaired, or it was going to cost more to get them repaired than to just buy another one. That's when we finally bought the Breville, and of course it's held up to everything I've asked it to do since then. For a food processor, you can use that to make pie crusts. I really like it for pie crusts. That's what I make my dough in to make like dumplings. So I usually do bread doughs, cinnamon roll doughs, larger batches of doughs in the mixers. But doughs like dumplings or pie crust where you're cutting in butter, I go to the food processor. Food processors are sold by their capacity. I have a really big one because I have a big family, and so I'm typically doing a lot more of something. You can get by with a smaller one. You're just gonna have to do more batches if you're trying to make volume. But I use it a lot. Like if I'm cooking anything in bulk, and let's say I need to dice 15 onions. Well, I'm going to put it in the food processor rather than sitting there and dicing them by hand. I'm going to get a comparable end product with a lot less time. on my behalf. Any mixing job where I want something like emulsified. So if I make hollandaise sauce, I typically am going to do that in the blender. Could do that also in the food processor. It would probably come out the same. But for us, the blender is mostly for drinks, for smoothies. And we do a lot of smoothies. And we do things like green smoothies, where smoothies have things like kale or spinach in them that you really don't want any chunks of it. So that's why I like a really good blender. But you can also use a Vitamix to make nut butters. You probably could make some sort of dough in there. I've never really done that because I've always had another option. And I've also seen where people use the dry containers regularly to grind wheat berries. I've done that before a long time ago because the Vitamix was like the first nice tool I got. And so I used it for a lot more, but it's been so long. It's been, you know, over 15 years ago. I can't really honestly give you a real review on that because I don't really remember. I do know that I have ground wheat in it. I have ground nuts in it to make nut butters. I have made almond milks in it by soaking almonds and then putting them through the Vitamix. It's very versatile, but at the point I'm at now with all the other tools, I mostly really just use it for smoothies, beverages, sauces, and things that need to be emulsified. For this segment, welcome to the floor. I don't want to lift these things up and have to put them back down. These are my canners. Here I have the water bath canner, which this is just an enameled pot. It's really large. This is actually made by Graniteware, I think. As I mentioned, I have also canned a lot in just a big old stainless steel pot. Now this does have ridges on the bottom. You don't want to can on anything with a solid flat bottom without putting something on it. So if you use a stainless steel pot, you need to put something down. Even if it's just like a towel, you could lay down some canning ring lids. You can get like a little grate that goes in the bottom of a pot. The reason why is when you heat those, it can actually create a vacuum and actually fuse your canning jars to the bottom of your pot. So with this one, what makes it a canner is that the bottom of the pot is ridged. This is called an All-American pressure canner. This is the 21.5 quart size. They make larger sizes than this. I don't recommend them unless you have a really open stove. So for me, if I had the larger size, I wouldn't be able to lift jars out of it underneath my range hood, especially if you have one of those like microwave range hoods. It would be super problematic. So I like the smaller size. So this one has the lid. It actually comes with two like great inserts because in the 21.5 size you can do 7 quart jars, or you can use one of those layers and you can actually stack and do 2 layers of pint jars. But this has the little weight that jiggles as well as the pressure meter. Canning is one of those things. Why people want to go to war with strangers on the internet over canning, I don't know. But that is a battle that is being fought daily with zeal. There are all kinds of rules as far as canning goes. In the United States, what is suggested is that you water bath can high acid foods and that you pressure can low acid foods. There are lots of resources out there that tell you different things and what to do. You know, I found one book I really loved, and then a lot of people are like, that's so unsafe. And here's the thing. I just think that you have to use common sense and you have to make decisions you're willing to stand by. I promise you, I won't ever feed you anything that I canned while fudging on a rule without telling you first. Probably won't ever feed you anything that I canned, if we're being honest. So like, when I tell you this is what I'm doing and this is what's worked for me, I mostly follow that rule. So I use my pressure canner for broths and green beans and black-eyed peas and meats, anything like that. I'm going to do it in the pressure canner because I do feel like it produces a safer product. As far as water bath canning, just since I've been canning, some of those recommendations have been changed, but this is typically what you're going to do for things like jams, jellies, salsas, things that are very high in sugar or in acid, which works as preservation to keep that safe. Both are great, both are valid. And if you're wanting to make shelf-stable food that you don't have to use a ton of freezer space for, learning to can is just a really good way to put up food. I do not think that it is the end-all be-all of food preservation. And frankly, there are a lot of things that people will can and they're like, yeah, I make tons of this. I don't want to eat it. Like, I like pickles, I like jams, I like all that stuff, but things that I have to add a ton of sugar or vinegar to is not always how I want to eat my food. So, you know, I love canning, I do a lot of canning, but I don't think that it stands alone as the only way to preserve food. I like freezing stuff also. I like dehydrating. I like trying to grow year round so I can eat things fresh, which is actually my favorite way to eat things out of the garden. But I do think learning to can is a great way to turn your waiting room into a classroom, because you can get a canner and can in an apartment with store-bought produce. You do not have to wait until you're growing your own produce to learn to can. In fact, I would highly suggest you don't wait, because you're gonna make mistakes. And if you work really hard to grow something and then you accidentally mess it up in the canning process because you're a brand new canner, you're gonna be really way more disappointed than if you had learned that lesson on some cheaper produce you just purchased at the store. So the next thing is actually out in my shed that we have, that we put a mini split in and keep food and some gadgets in, the dehydrator I mentioned earlier. I have an Excalibur 9 shelf dehydrator. I really like Excalibur dehydrators. Dehydrating is not something that you have to have a fancy tool for, but a nice dehydrator is just going to allow you to do more at once and allow it to be a little more hands-off, because a lot of dehydrators don't dehydrate evenly, and so you just have to watch it a lot more and move things around, because you'll end up with, you know, one rack of jerky that's like brittle and another one that's still, you know, not done enough. So you have to, you know, shift the layers around, which is not that big of a deal. And I think it's better to dehydrate that way than to not dehydrate at all. But by buying one of the nicer ones, and there are other options out there besides the Excalibur, that's just what I have. You can dehydrate things without a dehydrator, and I think it's really good. And there are a lot of things like herbs, flowers that you would harvest for teas that you actually don't want to put in the dehydrator, because heating those to a certain point can actually damage them. And so just hanging those to dry is sufficient. So if you want to dehydrate things but you are holding yourself back because you think you don't have the right tools, I would encourage you to kind of try to push the limits on that. And then when you get to the point that you feel like you could really use that tool, we use our dehydrator to dehydrate jerky, to dehydrate a lot of vegetables from the garden. I love using it to dehydrate things like onions and aromatics. That's how we do a lot of powders. So I can dehydrate peppers and grind them down into a powder. I can dehydrate smoked peppers and grind them down into a powder. And that's how we're making seasonings. And I think it's a good tool to turn your waiting room into a classroom, because it is something you can really use in a smaller place. It does help you preserve the harvest. It's not the end all be all. In fact, you know, I also have a freeze dryer, and it's also out in the shed, and I love the freeze dryer. I think that it's really cool. I have a Harvest Right freeze dryer. I have the large size, and it is really cool. You can do a lot of really cool things with it. And I think that if you commit to growing food over the years, collecting all of these tools so you have options so that you can save foods in a variety of ways, I think that's really the main goal. But getting one tool and mastering it is great. Pressing it and finding the versatility is great. You're not going to want to only eat dehydrated food over the winter. You're not going to want to only eat canned food over the winter. You're not going to want to only eat freeze-dried food over the winter. So if you're really trying to grow a year's worth of food or much of your food, you're going to want to try all these different things. I don't feel like you have to have any of them, but I think it just adds versatility to how you're able to save your food and enjoy your harvest. All right, last thing I'm going to cover today, and that is bakeware. I actually mentioned this in a video recently because I have a Pampered Chef party open with my friend Samantha. She is a Pampered Chef consultant. Pampered Chef has a lot of great stuff, but really the thing that I most tout from them is the stoneware. And it's not to say it's the only exceptional thing, but I find it to be the most exceptional thing. I love Pampered Chef stoneware. I have lots of different forms of it. This right here was my first Pampered Chef pan. This came with Jeremiah. He had this when we got married. I had never used Pampered Chef prior to that. This is a pizza stone, and as you can see, it's very well seasoned. It's much like cast iron. It gets better with use. And you can buy stoneware from other makers, but I have used the Pampered Chef consistently. I like it because it's made in the US, and it has a really good warranty on it. So if something happens to it, you can typically get it replaced, which is nice. So yeah, these are just like the jelly roll pans. At this point, I have quite a few different varieties. Pizza stones. I do have bread pans that I use, muffin pans, and casseroles, as well as my very favorite pie pans are Pampered Chef stoneware. I have many great traits. Attentiveness is not my best one. And baking has been historically difficult for me because I am a little lackadaisical. I get a lot of things going at once, and that timer goes off, and I'll think, okay, I'll get over there in a second, and 5 minutes later, and that can make all the difference in the world when you're baking. I love stoneware because it doesn't burn things. It will dry them out before it burns them. And I find that there's a little more wiggle room with baking when that's the case, because you can eat something that's a little drier easier than you can eat something that has a black bottom. So I use the stoneware loaf pans for baking all our bread. I use the stoneware cookie sheets for everything. We make our bacon in the oven on stoneware, and it doesn't burn things the way that metal or glass does. And I have found that they last a really long time. Now, obviously they are breakable, so if you were to just like drop one on the ground, it would break. We have broken them before by this one, bless my mother-in-law. She was really ditzy. We picked on her a lot for it. We miss that a lot about her now. But she took one out of the oven once and set it on a hot eye on the stove, and it broke it. But for the most part, they hold up. You can break them, but I've found them to be extremely durable. And we use those for cooking meat, baking meat in the oven, for doing any sort of like baking sweets or breads or anything like that, for doing pies. And I cannot sing the praises of stoneware enough because it has made me feel much more confident as a home cook. Whereas before I'd always be like, I'm terrible at baking, I burn everything. And really it was just the pans I was using and the way that they conducted heat and the way that they did things. There was just very little grace. This is not the highest quality oven. It does not heat evenly. It is very frustrating to cook in something like that. But whenever you're using tools like enamel Dutch ovens and stoneware pans that conduct heat better, you don't deal with burning things as much because you have good tools. So a lot of people think that they're not good at cooking, but they're actually just using really poor quality tools. And the last thing, I'm just gonna put a little clip up here because I have made so many videos about these lately and they're out in the shed, and I can show you this way. Roaster ovens. I sing the praises of roaster ovens a lot, especially this time of year because they're cheaper to find at this time of year. If you look for a roaster oven online, a lot of times you will find them being sold way too expensively. Like they'll be listed for $130 or something. They should not cost that much. You can typically buy a roaster oven at Walmart, an 18 quart, for about $40 during Thanksgiving time. And if you will wait just another month or so, these things will be all over Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace because people buy them over the holidays to like cook a ham or a turkey, and then they get rid of them. But they are amazing for the Homestead kitchen. That's what I use for making all of my bone broths that I need to simmer long term. I'll roast potatoes in them. You can put 2 chickens in one and roast 2 chickens at once. Big pieces of meat you can roast in there, and it's so nice. You can make, you can roast your chickens, shred all of the meat off, put the bones back in, slow simmer them to make a broth, strain that out, put the broth back in, put the chicken back in the roaster, put all the vegetables in, put rice in or noodles, and slow simmer that, and you've got a massive container of soup. It is great, super versatile. I know I've had multiple people comment from other countries that say they are not available there. Oh, that makes me so sad because I love the roaster oven for the Homestead kitchen. So if you can get your hands on one, especially if you can get your hands on one for a deal, I definitely would add that to your list. All right, guys, well, that concludes what I think has just turned into a very long video. I'm sorry for that, but I hope it was helpful. Though I don't think it's an incredibly exclusive list. I think there are probably some other things smattered in. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. So if you have tools that you also love, maybe some little gadgets or some little appliances or things that really make your life easier, please share them in the comment section below. And also, if you have any requests of things that you're wanting to know about in this series, please also let me know, because I'd love to take that into consideration. This will be partnered with blog posts, so I'll put some links so you can go back and revisit this later without having to watch this really long video again. And I do hope this helps you. Thank you for hanging out with me today, and bless you. Until next time.